Okay, today's daf is Pesachim, daf bet. We're starting a new Masechet, always an exciting moment. To this week's Shiurim are sponsored by Valerie Adler in honor of her girlfriends who've been learning and sharing this journey, Sherry Begner, Kay Weinberger, Etty Kornbluth, Lisa Barretts, and her daughter Anushka Adler. And today's Shiur has a lot of other dedications. It's by Judy Shapiro for the 13th year side of her beloved father, Albert Teichman, Zichrono Livracha, and by Dvorah Katz in memory of her grandmother, Frida Bat Yosef Zichronah Livracha, on her Yortzeit, and remembering how much she inspired her students. May her neshama have an aliyah. And by Leslie Nadel in memory of her late sister, Ruth Lewis, Rachel Bat Berel Halevi of blessed memory, whose Yortzeit is today, and in recognition of her husband, Don, who has now completed the entire Shas cycle and begins today his second cycle of Daf Yomi. Mazal tov. Okay, we're going to start at the Mishnah. Okay, just before we start, I'll give a quick intro to what's going to happen in Masechet Pesachim. Okay, the order is very simple. It goes chronologically. Some Masechtot work like that, where the Mishnayot are organized according to chronology, like, for example, Masechet Yoma, where we have what happens. They start with the preparations before Yom Kippur that the Kohen Gadol has to go through. It starts 7 days before, and then it continues to the day of, and then through what exactly the Kohen Gadol does on that day. Similarly with Pesach, we're going to have that. We start with the very first thing one has to do, which is, it's not exactly the first, but it's the first halacha, so to speak, which we'll talk about exactly as a halacha, which is bedikat chametz. So we're going to start with bedikat chametz, checking for chametz on Erev Pesach. Then we get to bior chametz, the burning of the chametz and getting rid of chametz. Then we get into until when can you eat chametz or can't eat chametz. We're going to get into matzah, okay, different things about matzah, about mixtures of chametz. Then we're going to talk about Isur Melacha, which we're going to already make reference to early in the Masechet, but about the fact that there's this issue that one is not supposed to be working on Erev Pesach. Then we're going to move into what goes on Yud Dalet in the afternoon, and that's Erev Pesach. All the sacrificing of the Korban Pesach. We do the slaughtering and the preparation and all that. They only eat it at night. So the next number of prakim after that go into the slaughtering of the Korban Pesach and the whole preparation and all the details about the sacrifice itself. And then finally, the last parak, the 10th chapter, will be about Leil HaSeder, about the night, Seder night. That's the chapter that also we're launching a new class, if you haven't yet heard about it, starting in January, a beginner's skills class, which will focus on a number of sections of that last chapter. And will end at Pesach, both with that group that's learning in the beginner's class, issues relating to the Leil HaSeder or a skills building class, and the Siyum for Pesachim happens to be right before Pesach. So it's a great way to end leading into the Pesach Chag. So if you've joined Daf Yomi today, it's a great day to join. It's a great time, being that we're going to finish just before Chag Pesach. So it's finally, we get to something, not finally, we've been dealing with practical things, but this is really much more practical, certainly, than Eruvin, which for most people, it's not so practical if you're not the one building the Eruv. Okay, so let's move on to the Mishnah. Or la'arba'asar bodkin et hachametz le'or haner. So or la'arba'asar. Now this is already a tricky line. Already the first word doesn't make any sense. Or la'arba'asar literally means, or at least I'll translate the words. Or means light. La'arba'asar means the 14th. So the light of the 14th, which sounds very strange. The 14th of Nisan. Bodkim et hachametz. Nisan, the Pesach comes out on the 15th of Nisan. So, or la'arba'asar, which I'll already tell you because otherwise it's really hard to move forward, but it's going to be the discussion of today's daf and tomorrow's, which is, what does the word or here mean? But eventually we're going to say it means the night of. And in the Hebrew language, when you talk about the Hebrew date, you always say or li. Okay, so if tomorrow, let's say it's nighttime and tomorrow is hey, so we're going to say, and today is Dalid. So when it becomes nighttime, we say or lehei, whatever day it is, or whatever month it is. So or le means the night of. Okay, but to the Gemara, it's not going to be so clear that that's what it means, and they're going to question. So the night of the 14th, bodkim et hachametz, we check for chametz. Le'or haner, you use a candle. Okay, there's different, right? Now, you could have just done it during the day, but that's why it also seems like they're doing it at night, because you use a candle. Okay, B'dikat chametz has turned into one of those things that really B'dikat chametz is just to make sure. What's the idea? We want to make sure you don't have chametz in your house, right? So you check through your house, make sure there's no chametz, but the issue is that it's just a preparatory thing for the holiday. However, it's one of those things that's turned into a big deal, right? Just like building your sukkah, let's say, or a better example, the Sudat Masechet, the meal before Yom Kippur. Everybody makes a big deal about the meal before Yom Kippur, even though it's really just preparatory. It's make sure to eat before the holiday, right? So, or I'll give you an even better one, lighting candles Friday night. The reason they lit candles Friday night was to make sure there was light in their house, but it turned into ceremonial type thing. Likewise, B'dikat chametz turned into something ceremonial, even though theoretically it could be only something technical, which is to make sure you don't have chametz in your house. I'm going to read now a few commentaries because this is something very interesting. Rashi says, why do we do B'dikat chametz? If you look at the second line of Rashi, Bodkin, shelo la'avor alav b'bal yere'eh u'b'bal yematzeh. We're going to learn this inside, that the Torah says you cannot see chametz and you cannot find chametz in your house. It's forbidden to see chametz. Now, you could see chametz if you're walking on the street and someone else is eating bread on Pesach. That's not your problem. But you can't see chametz in your house that belongs to you. You're not supposed to have you can't find chametz in your house, any of that. In order to ensure that, we check. That's what Rashi says. Tosfot says, I don't understand. How could that be? Because Tosfot says, okay, if you look at Tosfot, the first Tosfot on the page, the second line, B'kasheleri, kevan ditzarich bitul, okay, which we're going to learn further on, which is another thing we do before Pesach, is we nullify all our chametz. We say everything, and we say it at the end of B'dikat chametz, and then we say it after we burn the chametz the next morning. And we say everything should be nullified. So if that's the case, why do you have to get rid of everything? If you basically say, and this is based on laws of hefker, which is that we can say that things are ownerless. I can give up my possessions. And this comes up all over the Gemara. So if you do bitul, then that should be sufficient. So why do you need to check? Okay. And that's what Tosfot says. Why do they need bedika? So if we're on the fourth line of Tosfot, it says, even though really bitul is enough, says we're worried that you might accidentally eat it. In other words, better to get rid of your chametz, even though theoretically you could say, well, I'm making it all ownerless and I don't really own it. But what if you might find something nice to eat and you might forget that it's Pesach and you might eat it? So it's to prevent you on Pesach from accidentally eating. One interesting point about Tosfot's question, right? His whole question is premised on the fact that there's a concept of bitul, of nullifying your chametz. And it's asking a question on the Mishnah, why the Mishnah say we have to do bedika when there's bitul. So Safrai, in his book, Mishnat Eretz Yisrael, which is an academic book on the Mishnah, says that there was no concept of bitul when the Mishnah was written. That's something the rabbis instituted later. And it was something from the time of the Gemara. And in the time of the Mishnah, when they talked about bedika, there was no such thing. And that's a great answer to Tosaf's question, because it's basically saying, well, the concept of bitul didn't really exist then. So bedika predates bitul, and that's why it's not really a question. But in any case, Tosfot answers his answer, and the Ran answers a different answer. The Ran says they were worried that bitul means I'm saying everything's nullified, but maybe you won't do it with a full heart. If you don't do it with a full heart, because it really is your food and it's really there. So therefore, better to get rid of all your food in case you don't do bitul properly. And then you end up being the owner of chametz on Pesach, which is problematic. Okay, moving on in the Mishnah. If you don't normally put chametz in a certain place and you know you never bring chametz there, then you don't have to check. Obviously, this doesn't include if you have children in your house who might bring chametz into places that you wouldn't necessarily, right? You know, like we have a rule in our house, no chametz in the basement, but we still check because maybe somebody snuck some chametz down there at some point while nobody was looking. So, but assuming you know that no chametz was ever brought somewhere, then you don't actually need to check. So then when they said 2 rows in a martef, what were they referring to? Okay, so when they said, now this is a very interesting line. Okay, they're referring to something as if we know what this is. Okay, now Some people say, well, it's referring to an upcoming Mishnah, and therefore they knew that. But it seems many people say that there was an earlier Mishnah, and this Mishnah is referring, and this is very interesting in terms of levels of the Mishnah. The Mishnah was written over a period of time. Again, it was really collections of materials that were only written down toward the end of the Mishnah time period, where Rabbi Yehuda Nasi collected them. But they existed beforehand orally. So now they say, when they talked about the Shtei Shulot Martef, 2 rows in the cellar, they're talking about a wine cellar, what were they referring to? Okay, they want to know, what did they mean? And they say it must be makom shemachnisim bo chametz. It must be a wine cellar where people sometimes bring chametz down to. Otherwise, they don't really understand why you would be checking in a wine cellar. If it's just for wine, there's never really any chametz there. And now we're going to say, Beit Shammai omrim shtei shurot al panei kol hamartef. Okay, so now the question becomes, right now we're going to learn about the martef, but we're really not going to learn this just yet. There's a machlokah Beit Shammai Beit Hillel, what exactly in this basement, the martef is the basement, the cellar, what you have to check. So Beit Shammai says, we won't really understand this yet, we'll have to get into this later. Shtei shurot al panei kol hamartef, 2 rows across the whole cellar. I'll try to translate this simply. The 2 outer ones, which are the upper ones. So again, we'll wait to see. Okay, Rashi even says, the Gemara is going to explain all this. So when Rashi says that, we know, okay, we can wait till we get there. Today's entire sugya of the Gemara is a very atypical sugya, I would say. In general, in the beginning of Masechet, we often end up with atypical sugyot. Many times people claim that they're svara'itic, they're later sugyot that were added later, although here you're going to see that Amoraim appear here. Okay, so can't say the whole sugya is svara'i, which is the time period after the Amoraim lived, and usually it's without names. But in general, this is just a bit of a strange sugya, and we're going to try, it's all going to be linguistic as to what is this word or, all about the first word of the Mishnah. My ol. Rav Huna Amar Naghe. Rav Huna says it means light. Rav Yehuda Amar Lele. Rav Yehuda says it means night. Okay, it's funny because in English, light and night sound very similar, but we know they're opposites, right? Or they're not exactly, but we'll see. So now the Gemara says, Rav Huna says it means light, and Rav Yehuda says it means night. So kasal kadatach, they assumed, and only at the very end of the sugya tomorrow are we going to understand that they really rejected this assumption. But originally they assumed, demanda amar naghe mamash, that Rav Huna, who said naghe, light, meant when it's light out, meaning daytime. During the day, you do b'dikat chametz. Umanda amar lele mamash. And the one who says nighttime meant actually nighttime. Okay, so one says you do b'dika during the day, and one says you do, and presumably it means in the morning, as soon as it becomes morning of the 14th. And the one who says night means you do it at night. So meitive. Now we're going to have a slew of questions. I made a list. Okay, today altogether there's going to be 15 sources brought to try to knock out one of the 2 opinions here. First is the first 7 are going to, the first 3 are against Rav Yehuda. The 4th is against Rav Huna. It's going to be a little ping-ponging. Okay, 3 against Rav Yehuda. The 4th against Rav Huna. Another 3 against Rav Yehuda. And then another 3 against Rav Huna. And then another 1 against Rav Yehuda. And that's going to be our structure for today. And then the next 4 are going to be against Rav Huna. Okay, most of them are going to be answered. 3 of them actually don't have a resolution to the question. And that's why in the end, we're going to reject, which you kind of already know, we're going to reject Rav Huna because we don't hold that we do b'dikat chametz during the day. It's at night. Okay, so like I said, it's not going to be a clear structure of, oh, here's all the questions against Rav Yehuda. Here's all the questions against Rav Huna. It's going to ping pong back and forth. So let's get started. Meitive. So meitive is a word that says we're going to take Tanaitic source, something written in the time of the Mishnah, and we're going to use it as a question against an Amora, someone who lives in the time of the Gemara. Someone who lives in the time of the Gemara can't go against a Tanaitic source unless he can somehow explain it. So today we're going to bring a lot of sources that seem to go against, and we'll explain how we can get our way out of them. Meitive. Haboker or v'hanashim shulchu. Okay, this meitive is a little different than normal. This is actually bringing a verse from the Torah, not something from the Mishnah, but a verse from the Torah. What's this verse from? It's from Bereshit chapter 44, when the brothers go down to Egypt, and then he sends them home and he slips the goblet into Binyamin's bag. And it says, Haboker or vanashim shulchu, right? It becomes morning and the people go. And then immediately what happens? They get stopped, right? Once they're on their way, they get brought back and they say, what happened, right? It wasn't a very successful trip, which I'm kind of mentioning this because it's interesting to see what the Gemara does with this. So the Gemara says, Alma or Yamamahu, right? This says Haboker or, here you see or denotes morning because it's mentioned right next to morning. So the Gemara says, wait a minute, Miktiv ha-or boker. It doesn't say or is morning. It says haboker or, the boker was, right? It was, the morning was light, like it lit up in the morning. Ktiv, okay? That's what it says in the verse. So therefore, they say, Kiman da amar tzafla nahar. It's like someone would say, and they use the Aramaic, morning, the morning lit up, okay? Or the morning had lightened. So what they're basically saying is, or is not a noun to denote day. It's a verb here. It's saying it lit up. And therefore, this doesn't teach you anything about our Mishnah. And as Rav Yehuda says in the name of Rav, and now we're going to explain why did they go when the boker was or. That's why I said pay attention to what the story was about, because it says when you go on your way, you should always go out. B'kitov. Kitov is a reference to in Breshit when it says God created the light. It says saw the light and it was good, right? I can't remember the exact words, but here Vayar Elohim et ha'or kitov. Okay, I did have the pasuk right. God saw the light and it was good. So when they say b'kitov, they mean when it's light. So you should get on your way early in the morning, and you should go back home. Also, start early in the morning. This reminds me of a trip I once did with a friend. We took a day off. I must have been about 20 years old. And my friend Ruth, we went on a trip and we on a tiul, we went on a hike and we slept late and we got going late and it was 12 o'clock and it was the winter. It was in the Dead Sea area, so it was nice weather, but sunset at 4 and we start going on our way. We were following directions from some book. We got totally lost and we were nervous at a certain point that the sun was going to set on us, right? So if you're going to go, we ended up being okay. Obviously, I'm here today. But the point being that when you go on a trip, always go in the morning because you might get detained, something might happen, and you don't want it to get dark on you, especially in those days when there were no lights, right? We were on a hike in the middle of nowhere, no lights or anything else. So there you see that or is just a verb, and therefore, right, when the morning got lit up, that's when they went on their way. Meitive, second source against Rav Yehuda. Uche or boker yizrach shemesh. Okay, and the light of the morning, Yizrach Shemesh, right? In the light of the morning, the sun will rise. Okay, we're going to explain in a minute what this verse means. It's a verse from Shmuel Bet, chapter 23. It's a speech of David HaMelech. We're going to see Alma or Yamamahu. Okay, it's his final speech. And now they say, so again, what do you see? Or sounds like day. So now the Gemara says, no, miktiv or boker, right? So sorry, Alma or Yamamahu. Okay, like here you see or again is day. Miktiv or boker. No, it doesn't say again or boker. Light is morning. Uchi or boker ktiv. It says and like the light of the morning. And this is what it means. Uchi or boker ba'olam hazeh ke'ein zrichat shemesh letzadikim la'olam haba. The light of the morning in this world. Okay, what they want to say is, before the first one we saw when they went on their way early, what we meant was it's sunrise. Now what we're saying is the or boker, the early light in the morning where it's really not light. We're talking about earlier than that. It is, okay, now they're going to say, Yizrach Shemesh, the sun will shine in the future. Now they're talking about tzaddikim. They're saying this is a reference to the future. Zrichat Shemesh l'tzaddikim ba'olam haba. That the way the sunlight will be for tzaddikim in the next world, right? It will be our when that early morning that for us is light, it's dark still in Olam Hazeh. In Olam Haba, that early hour is going to be so bright because the sun is going to be so bright in the Olam Haba. Again, it's literal, right? We're talking figuratively, okay? That it's going to be so bright in Olam Haba that even when the sun starts to rise, it's already going to be very bright. Okay, so again, or is just describing the light. It's not talking about a time of day. It's not denoting morning. Okay, next one. Meitive. Vayikra Elohim le'or yom. Okay, God called or day. He called the light day. Alma, again, what do you see from here? Or yamamahu. It sounds like or is day. Third question against Rav Yehuda, who said that or l'arba'asar means at night. So they say hachikamra limeir uba kira'o yom. As it started to get light out, God called it day. Again, it's just describing the light. When he saw the light, right, then he decided to call it day. But elame'ata, so wait a minute. Ulechoshech kara laila limachshich uba kara laila. Wait a minute. Then it says, but God called darkness nighttime. So now wait a minute. Do we mean, is it as it started to get dark, he called it night? Just like as it started to get light, he called it day. As he started to get dark, he called it night. We know, and this is a reference to the beginning of brachot, we know from the very beginning of brachot that what? There's actually debates about this, but we generally call it day all the way until 3 stars come out at night. So that's not when it's machshich. Machshich is as it starts to get dark. So as it started to get light, he called it day. And as it started to get dark, he called it night. That's not what we're talking about, right? We call it day all the way until Tzedek Kochavim. So what do they say? Elahachi kama. Now this is what it means to say. Kar yerachmana lenehora upakte amitzvata diyamama. Kar yerachmana lechashocha upakte amitzvata delelia. Okay, so what does this mean? This is that God called it day, and he commanded it, a mitzvata diyamama. He said, you are going to rule during the day. In other words, with the way you read the pasuk, right? Let's go back to the pasuk. Vayikra Elohim le'or yom. He called the light and said, come shine now. You're going to be shining during the day. And then he called the darkness and commanded it to rule at night. In other words, he basically said, or you come up during the day, right? Like a show. And darkness, you come out at night. But again, it doesn't mean that the word or is day. It's just saying, he said light, you're supposed to be there during the day, and darkness, you're supposed to be there at night. Okay, those were the first 3 against Rav Yehuda. Now, as I promised, we're going to have one against Rav Huna. Okay, so Rav Huna said, or is day. So let's see what we have against him. Meitive, halalu kol kochovei or. Okay, this is from, we say this every day in our prayers, in Psukei de Zimra, that all the stars of the light will praise you. Alma or ortahi. Now, when do stars shine? At night. So it sounds like kochovei or kochavim of the night. So what do they answer? No, hachi kamra. Halu kola kochavim ami'irim. Means all the stars that shine. Okay, or again means it's a verb here. It's the stars that shine. Elameata, but wait a minute. What does this mean? All the stars that are lighting up should praise God. So wait, the stars that aren't lighting up shouldn't praise God. The ones that we can't see doesn't make any sense. Ktiv, haktiv, it says halu kol tzva'av. All the hosts, everything up there should be praising God. So it doesn't make any sense to say that. Ela hakamashmana, what is this coming to teach you? De or kochavim nami orhu. That the light of the stars is also light. In other words, you might say only the light, right? That the light of the stars, maybe we don't call it light. Okay, what is this? What's this trying to teach us? L'may nafkamina. What's the relevance? L'noder min ha'ol. Someone who says, I vow not to get any benefit from light. Hanoder min, as it says in a Titania, as it says in a Braita, hanoder min ha'ol asur ba'oran shel kochavim. Someone who says, I won't get any benefit from light is forbidden to get benefit from lights of the stars. Okay, that's considered light, halachically. This is a whole aside about what they're saying, that verse. It's very interesting to say that verse, it's a verse in Tehillim, in Psalms, is coming to teach you something halachic about that this light of the stars is considered light. Meitive. Next question. Back to question against Rav Yehuda, who said that or is night. Le'or yakum b'rotzeach yiktal ani ve'evyon. In the day, okay, again, assuming this is going to go against him because or sounds like it's day. In the day, the murderer will rise and will kill a poor person, impoverished person. Ubalayla yehi keganav. And at night, he will be like a thief. Okay, I'll see in a minute what this means. But in any case, what are they trying to say? Okay, this is a verse in, I didn't check. It's a verse in Eov, okay, from the book of Job. And as you can see from the setup of the verse, it's comparing or in the morning, the murderer, at night, the thief. Okay, here you can see or is day. So they say no. What it really means to say is, and this relates to a very important, very basic sugya in Sanhedrin, which is all about if someone comes to your house to rob you, or what if you kill them? Are you obligated for killing them? Okay, is it self-defense or not? Okay, when a robber comes, are they coming to kill or are they coming just to take your stuff and they really aren't coming to be fighting with you at all? And if you start taking out a bat and smacking them and you injure them severely and kill them, you might be obligated because they weren't coming for that reason. So it's a big question. Maybe they are. Maybe they're coming. Maybe they have a gun. How do you know? So the Gemara says this is the way we understand that verse in Eov. If it's clear to you like the sun, like the light, right? It's very clear. That he's coming to kill. Okay, sometimes you could tell whether someone, when they're robbing your house, is coming to kill or not, right? They face a gun at you. If it's clear to you, then then he's clearly a murderer, and that's why the verse says le'or yakum rotzeach. If it's clear like light, and this is very similar to the way they learn, we'll have to wait many years till we get to Sanhedrin, but when we get there, you'll see the way they darshan the psukim and Sefer Shemot when it talks about the issue of a thief coming into your house and how do you know, and are you allowed to kill him or not? So we'll get to that, but this is another verse where they basically explain it in one of the ways that they explain it then, which is if it's clear to you that they're coming to kill, rotzeachu, then he must be a murderer, v'nitan latzilo b'nafsho, and you can basically kill him and nothing will happen, right? You won't get punished. But but at nighttime, you can't see things very clearly. If you're not sure whether the thief is coming to kill or not, you should view him not as a murderer, but just as a thief, and you're not allowed to kill him, okay? And if you do, you'll be punished. So again, we see that or doesn't necessarily mean or here is compared to Lila in terms of clarity at night. Or means it's light and clear, and Lila means it's dark and unclear. Meitive. Next question. Okay, that was our question. Now we're on question again on Rav Yehuda. Okay, another question. So we're up to question number 6, I believe. Okay, we have 2 more according to Rav Yehuda, if I did my count correctly. Meitive. Yachshachu kochvei nishpo yikav le'or va'ayin. Okay, this is again a pasuk from Eov. Psukim and Eov are very complicated to understand. Okay, this is basically Eov is saying, cursed should be the day that my mother gave birth to me. Okay, because look at this horrible life that I've had. Right, remember he loses his whole family. Everything starts going bad for him. So he says, Yachshachu koshvei nishpo. The stars of that day should become darkened. Yikav le'or va'ayin. Okay, it's looking for light and there is none. Va'al yir'eba afafei shachal, and it won't see the lighting up of the morning. So what do they say here? Mitika amar yikav le'or va'ayin hamor yamamahu. It sounds like they're grasping for light and they can't find. They're waiting for morning and it's not coming. So he says, Hatam meladhu tekalayit le'Eov lemazaleh. Eov's just cursing his mazal. It's not, okay, this is a curse. Amar, Yehe Rava, Delitzpe Hach Gavra Linahol Rava Lo Lishkeche. What he's saying is, I'm searching for light and I'm not going to find. Okay, he's basically cursing himself according to this. And he's saying, things are so bad for me. I'm just cursed and I'm searching for light and I'll never find it. Okay, but again, it's talking about light and it's not talking about day and it doesn't prove anything. Okay, Meitive. now we're back to we're still asking on or being night, okay? So, Meitive, Va'omar, ach choshech yishufenu, v'layla or ba'adenu. Okay, this is a pasuk from Tehillim. Okay, David, we're saying here that David is saying, I wanted, okay, choshech yishufeni, the darkness should encircle me, the laila or ba'adeni. Okay, so what does this mean? And it should basically, the laila will turn to, one second, choshech yachshich alav la'olam. Right. I said choshech yishufeni, but then laila or ba'adeni. The night turned to day, it sounds like. So again, it sounds like night is day and not night, like Rav Yehuda said. So alma or yamamahu. So they say no. Hatam hachi kamar David. This is what David was saying. Ani amarti ach choshech yishufeni lo olam haba. Right, the dark will encircle me even in the future. Shehu domeh li yom achshav. Okay, that it's like because what he was basically saying is, since I remember he sinned terribly with Bathsheba, since I sinned terribly with Bathsheba, right, I should be basically taken out of this world. Okay, this world I should be encircled in darkness, which is like Yom. Okay, meaning it's like day, but it should end up being night. But achshav ha'olam hazeh domeh lelayla or ba'adeni. Okay, but right, but I've gotten forgiven, and now it's basically turning to day. Okay, it's turning to light. So now again, they're saying it's not that it's that the night itself had light, and not that it actually turned to day. It's really talking about light and light and darkness, and it's not really referring to day or night. Okay, Meitive. Now we're going to have a question. Now we're going to have a slew of questions on Rav Huna. So again, I'll look at my list. We're going to have 3 more questions on Rav Huna and 1 more on Rav Yehuda for today. Okay, and that will finish up our daf. So Meitive. And now they're going to bring in here Rav Yehuda Omer. Okay, this is from a Mishnah further on, upcoming Mishnah. Bodkin Bodkim or Arba'asal, Uba Arba'asar Shacharit, Ubishat Bi'ul. You're supposed to check according to this Mishnah, according to Rabbi Yehuda, 3 times. We do B'dika Chametz once. According to Rabbi Yehuda, 3 times. When do you do it? Or Arba'asar, which we don't yet know what it means. Arba'asar Shacharit, which means Arba'asar in the morning. Ubishat Bi'ur, and when you burn the Chametz later in the day, later in the morning. So, Mitakama Rabbi Yehuda, Bodkin or Arba'asar. Uba Arba'asar Shacharit. Now, since it says or Arba'asar, and then it says Arba'asar in the morning, obviously or Arba'asar must be nighttime. So Alma or Tehu Shma Mina. That sounds like a pretty good proof, okay? And therefore they say, yeah, that must be the case. Like I said, some of these questions we're really not going to have an answer for. This one we don't have an answer for, which really seems to be a good rejection of Rav Huna's opinion that or is really day. Meitive. But for whatever reason, we're not sure why, the Gemara continues, even though we really could have stopped there and said, oh, that seems pretty clear, it's nighttime. But they bring more questions. From when on the 14th is it forbidden to do work? Okay, I mentioned this in the intro, that there's an Isur Melacha on the 14th. It's forbidden to work. Okay, we'll talk about when and why, but here's a question. From when on the 14th can you not work? Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov Omer, and this is really because they had to do preparations for the sacrifice, so they didn't want people busy working, and just for the holiday in general. So Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov Omer Mishat Ha'or. Okay, he says from the time of light. Okay, we'll see what this is soon. Rabbi Yehuda Omer Mishat Hanetzach Hama, from sunrise. Okay, this seems to indicate that Shat Ha'or is before sunrise, right? This seems to say Shat Ha'or must be as the sun is starting to rise. So now we have, it's really before, right? Maybe even from the nighttime, we'll see. Amar le Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov le Rabbi Yehuda. V'chihecha matzinu yom. Okay, it's unclear exactly, right? Mishat ha'or, it's sometime before Netzach Hama. Okay, so now we have a discussion between the two. Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov says to Rabbi Yehuda, V'chihecha matzinu yom shemikzato asur b'siyam malacha u'mikzato muztar b'siyam malacha. He says to him, normally, how do Jewish holidays start? They always start at night. So he says, it must be that Isur Malacha starts at night, because how can you say that there's a day, we don't have generally where we're going to say part of the day is forbidden to do work and part of it isn't, right? You have a holiday, the whole day is forbidden. So he says, how could you start something in the morning? It doesn't make any sense. Amar le, hu atzmo yochiach. He says, what do you mean? Pesach is a perfect example, Erev Pesach. Let's take Erev Pesach. What do we know? Mikzato mutar b'chilat chametz, mikzato asor b'chilat chametz. Some of the day you can eat chametz, and some of the day you can't eat chametz, right? We're going to learn this later, what the exact times are. But theoretically from the Torah, at midday, at chatzot, exactly at noon, you can't eat chametz. So here you have, before then you can, after that you can't. So why are you questioning me with this? So of course I can say that from the morning you can't do work, and even though you can at night, the night before. So now they say, Midika Amar Rabbi Yehuda Mishat Anetzach Hama Alma or Dikama Rabbi Lezer ben Yehuda ben Yaakov Ortahi. So they say, I got confused before when I said it means Amud HaShachar, because that's going to be the answer of the Gemara. The Gemara first says is, if obviously they're talking about different times, and it makes sense from Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov's response to him is that he thinks it obviously is much earlier, and we assume he thinks it starts from the night. Makes sense. So therefore, what do you see? Or is night because that's what he says. He says mish'ata or. Mish'ata or would mean from the night. So now they say, no, my or, Amud HaShachar. We can say or is Amud HaShachar. What's Amud HaShachar? It's about 72 minutes before sunrise. It's before it actually, the sun is starting to rise. That's Amud HaShachar, and that's what he means. But then we have a big problem. That doesn't make any sense to say that. Now, there's nothing saying or means as it's starting to get light out, right? Mishat ha'or, which then doesn't mean night. But then they say, Hachi teka'amar le'chamatzinu yom, shemikzato mutar b'siyat malacha, u'mikzato asur b'siyat malacha, nema iu l'nafshe. He could say the exact same thing to himself. He's also saying we're dividing between nighttime and daytime. He's just saying, I'm giving you an earlier time, but he still thinks that you can do work at night and you can't do it in the morning. So it doesn't make any sense. Ha'ika laila de kashari, because according to Kashari Rabbi Lezer ben Yaakov, because he still has nighttime, which is going to be permitted to do work. So the answer, hachi kamar, what he really means to say is like this. Bishlama ledidi, eshkachna de kapalge rabbanan ben yamama lelelia. For me, I can explain it well, because I can show you an example of where the rabbis distinguish between night and day. Okay, we're between times of day, where part of the day is a problem, part of it isn't. Where is that? Titani gabe tani yotzibor. It says by fast days. Okay, these are any fast days that are not Yom Kippur, Tisha B'Av, and some of the fast days they instituted for the rain. We'll get to all those when we learn Masechet Ta'anit. Ad matai ochel v'shotet. Till when can you eat and drink? Ad shi'aleh amud hashachar. Divrei Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov. He himself holds that till what time can you eat? You can eat until Amud HaShachar. That's why whenever you look at the times for fast days, right, it's this early time in the morning. It's before sunrise, because that's when you can do it. You can eat until that point. So he can say, I can show you, right, just like the fast started Amud HaShachar, likewise, it's going to be the same thing for Asiyat Malacha. Rabbi Shimon disagrees. Rabbi Shimon omer ad krot hagever. Okay, he says when the rooster crows, okay, which is his time is actually, right, that's before. He says it's even earlier, okay? But the point being that he could say that I have this distinction. Ela l'didach, but according to you, who thinks it's netzach hamatz, it's sunrise, no, but there's nothing else that distinguishes between sunrise and before sunrise. Hechi eshkacha, eshkachna yemama gufe depal gebe rabbanan. There's no day like that the rabbis distinguish and say something's allowed before sunrise, but not after sunrise. Okay, only fast days, and that's either alot hashachar or some earlier time. So Amar le hu atzmo yochiach. So Rabbi Yehuda says to him, no, what do you mean? That I can prove it from that day. Shemiksato mutar b'chilat chametz, umiksato asor b'chilat chametz. Because that day is a perfect example where part of the day you can eat and part of the day you can't. Okay, and I kind of mentioned 6 hours, but it's really, there's 4 hours and there's 3 hours. There's different hours. We're going to get into all that coming up. Not yet our issue at this point. But now we're going to say, Amar le, so now, Shapir Kamar le Rabbi Yehuda le Rabbi Eliezer. That's a great proof, right? So what's Rabbi Eliezer going to say to that? So Hachi Kamar le Rabbi Eliezer. This is Rabbi Elazar's response to what they said. Amina lach ana melacha de Rabbanan, va'at amart li chametz deoraita. In other words, chametz, and this is why I said 6 hours, chametz is forbidden from Torah law 6 hours into the day, okay, which is half the day, which is noon. So he says, noon, it doesn't always come out noon on our clock. Okay, we'll get into Sha'ot Zmaniyot and how that all works further down, but further on in the Masechet. But now he says like this. He says, you are proving to me an example from chametz from the Torah, but I'm talking about something rabbinic in nature. Yes, in the Torah, if the Torah says to distinguish, okay, so we're going to distinguish. But rabbinic law, this is rabbinic in nature. The rabbis don't distinguish this. Isur Malacha, it doesn't say in the Torah, you can't work on the 14th of Nisan. Tadhacha asar rachmana, vadhacha shari rachmana. Okay, in other words, the rabbis, right, the Torah decided that. That I understand. But you can't say, but rabbinic law, no. Like, how could you compare something the rabbis instituted? They never distinguish other than the Taniyot Tzibor, and that's Alot HaShachar. V'idach, what will Rabbi Yehuda answer to this? Sha'ot Rabbanan. Okay, he says, what do you mean? The hours, okay, I said it's 6 hours into the day, but the rabbis instituted earlier hours. So there you see, they distinguished. The rabbis did make this distinction even earlier in the day. V'idach, so what's Rabbi Elazar going to say to that? No, that's not rabbinic. The whole issue of not eating chametz erev Pesach and this distinction between what hours. Yeah, the hours are just the rabbis making an extra boundary on what the Torah said. But it's really based on a Torah law that there's something that cuts this day in half in terms of eating chametz. And again, Rabbi Elazar ben Yaakov will say that doesn't have to do with Torah. That's Torah law, and I'm talking about rabbinic law, Isur Malacha, and there you have it. Okay, that's the end of that little section. We got a little bit off tangent, but that was all to say that or does not necessarily mean night, because Rabbi Elazar ben Yaakov could be referring to Amud HaShachar and not to actual nighttime. Meitive. Okay, now we're on another question against Rav Huna, who says that or is day. Meitive. We only would put up bonfires. Okay, this is how they told everybody when the new moon was. They would put bonfires up on the top of mountains and people would see and they would know it was the new moon. But you would only do it when the moon comes in its right time. Okay, there's two options of when Rosh Chodesh can be, either on the 30th day or on the 31st. So if it comes on the 30th, then they would put the bonfires. If it didn't, then everyone would know by default that it was the 31st. So when would they light this? Or iburo. What does that sound like? Nighttime, right? Not daytime. Or iburo, the night of the day that it's supposed to be. So alma or tahu. What do you see? Or is night. Okay. So now they say, and here you see, this is a perfect proof. First of all, you're not going to see bonfires during the day, right? I mean, you could, but they would certainly put them at night so that people would see them from far away. It's much more noticeable. Shmamina, so this is another proof against Rav Huna that he actually doesn't have an answer for, and it seems very clear that here or means night. Meitive, last question for today, and this one we're going to go ping pong back to Rav Yehuda. Meitive, haya omed kol halayla umakriv al hamizbeach umakriv al hamizbeach. If you were doing all night long and you sacrificed, the Kohen was standing all night long and sacrificing. You don't do sacrifices at night. What it means is he was burning the parts of the meat, like the parts that didn't get burnt during the day. Those you can still burn at night. What does that mean? It means if you were working all night in the temple and it became morning, what would you do? You would have to wash your hands again. Okay, this is like if you stay up all night, you need to do Netilat Yadayim in the morning. Okay, so if the Kohen was working all night, he would need to wash his hands and feet in the morning. Divrei Rebbe. So what do you see here? Or sounds like day and not night. Le'ora. So what do they say? Ora shani. No, this says ora. It doesn't say or. It uses a different form of the word. Le'ora. That means to its light, which clearly means day. Doesn't necessarily mean that or doesn't mean night. So it's not really a problem with Rav Yehuda. We'll stop here for today and continue on with our questions tomorrow and finish up this sugya. Have a great day.